Hello and welcome to part 3 of my multi-part series on cognitive errors and behavioral biases. You can check out parts 1 and 2 if you follow these links. The idea, of course, is that we all make these mistakes, even if we know about them, and that they are affecting our analyses and our forecasting in negative ways. Now, given a set of safety controls, we will behave in riskier ways. If we have seat belts and anti-lock brakes, we will drive more aggressively, we will tailgate closer. If we're using helmets, whether or not these helmets are ski helmets or bicycle helmets or American football helmets, we will behave in riskier ways. We will ski faster, we'll bike more aggressively, we will make riskier tackles. Of course, the opposite is true. In Sweden, they switched from driving on the left-hand side of the road to the right-hand side of the road to conform with the rest of continental Europe. The worry was that accident rates would skyrocket when in fact accident rates were declined by more than 40%. Now, the same is going to be true in your investing. If you have stop loss orders, if you have nonlinear payouts like options, if you're using separate accounts, you may behave in riskier ways. You can learn more about these separate accounts and mental accounting in the previous videos. There is something called the bandwagon effect, and that is the tendency for us to do what everyone else is doing. Now, this is, of course, true in sports. That's where it gets its name. People have a tendency to become fans of the winning sports teams. This, in my opinion, is very true of the central banks. They're all doing exactly the same thing, and they're afraid to deviate. They'd rather be wrong and with the crowd than be right and be different. Now, I have a big video on that. Not big, but I have a video on that where I talk about it in more detail if you follow this link here. The same is going to be true with products and assets. So, people are drawn to the popular products, whether or not they actually like them or value them. The same is going to be true with stocks. You see particular stocks in the news a lot. People are drawn to them because other people are purchasing them. Now this one is a long format video, long format interview with Roger Ibbotson, talked about his concept of popularity. You can see that full discussion here following this link. It is a really intuitive way to think about asset pricing and future/expected returns. I highly recommend taking a look at that. There is also something called the framing effect. So we like to think about things in a positive frame. We will be more attracted to the yogurt that's 80% fat-free than we will be attracted to the fat that contains 20% fat. They are the exact same thing, but we like that positive frame. Now, in an experiment, they talked about 600 people with a disease. If we follow this treatment, 200 people will live, and people like that was a positive frame, and most people went with that option. But if they reframe that and said, if we go with this treatment, then 400 people will die, then very few people wanted that outcome. The outcomes were the same, but the options or our willingness to go with those options changed based on that frame. Of course, the same thing is totally true of stocks, and the frame that people often get trapped in is their purchase price. So if you bought a stock at 20, you will think differently about that stock if it's currently trading at 25, then if it's currently trading at 25 and you purchased it at 30, your purchase price changed, but the current stock price doesn't, but you will behave differently. You don't want to think about that loss when you purchased at 30. You like the game when you purchased it at 20, but you should be evaluating that stock today based on what it is and not thinking about your purchase price. It's a very common error that I see. There's also something called the sunk cost effect. So if you think about costs, there are these retrospective costs, or these are costs that have already been incurred. You can't recuperate these costs. They're gone, they're over. You shouldn't be evaluating any project, any stock, any bond based on these retrospective costs. You should think about prospective costs. What's it going to cost me to continue the project, etc. This is very common. People don't like to think about things in terms of losses. We have this loss aversion, where we maybe be willing to hold on to a stock because it's currently in a losing position. It's trading below where we purchased it versus when it's trading above. There's also something called this over-optimistic probability. So we looked at horse bettors and we asked horse bettors the probability their horse would win, given either A, they had already made the bet, or B, they were going to make the bet. So people who had already made the bet gave themselves a more likely positive outcome than the people who had yet to make the bet. And really that shouldn't matter. but they felt that it did, or sorry, subconsciously did, because they already incurred that cost. The endowment effect, which is another favorite of mine, is that your perception of value changes whether or not you own it. So they had this famous study where they said, here's a coffee cup. How much would you pay for it? And people say on average, in this particular study, said they would pay $2.87 for that coffee mug. Now they also said, well, we give you the coffee mug. How much would you really be willing to take uh, in terms of a price in order to give it up? And that jumped to $7.12, simply because they owned it or didn't own it. This is for sure true in the market, whether we're talking about purchasing things, or we're products, or we're talking about stocks and bonds. So when you own it, you have this reluctance. Hey, it's mine. I'm reluctant to give it up. I see this all over the place. It's very common. Finally, again, these things are known. Now that you know about them, it doesn't change your susceptibility to them. You need to come up with a plan, a disciplined plan to engage your system to brain to stop yourself from making these things. You need to figure out what that is. Finally, when this whole series is over, I will talk about my ideas there, but I want you to think about it on your own first. Anyway, thanks so much for listening.